Made with the support of NZ On Air.
Quick heads up, there's a little bit of swearing in this episode.
All right, I'm taking you down to our sequencing lab, and this is actually sort of a measure of how far we've come compared to when we were doing sequencing at the time. So this is a new...
Dr. David Winter is guiding us through the corridors of Porirua PHF Science, the government science institute that during COVID was still called ESR.
If you look down there, there's the PC2, where I'm not going to take you, where there are potentially hazardous viruses and things.
PC2 means Physical Containment Level 2. And the door has one of those big, scary virus hazard signs. You know, the 3 interlocking crescents like you see in the zombie movies.
So we're going to PC1, which is...
The room David Winter is letting us into is at a slightly lower level of biohazard.
So we're going to PC1, which is you're allowed in, basically. I'm going to take you into the actual... where we actually have the sequencing instruments.
You still wouldn't want to lick the floors in here, I guess, but we've been assured we're in no great danger of picking up some weird disease in PC1.
This big, shiny one with the pink light coming through it, we use primarily for bacterial sequencing.
There are benches covered with expensive-looking machines.
The smaller one over there is an older version, and that's what we use with Joanne for the wastewater variants.
David is talking about his colleague Joanne Hewitt. Remember, in episode 5, she told us about tracking the COVID genome variants by testing wastewater.
So once a month there's a run on that one where we compare the wastewater variants to the clinical variants, but the one that was working overtime during COVID, if you come this way...
This is the main event, the machine that once kept New Zealand informed about what the virus was getting up to.
This is the Oxford Nanopore, the gridiron. So this little box here, like I said, about the size of a PC, is able to...
Visually, I gotta confess, it's a wee bit underwhelming. A boxy device about the size of a home computer printer. And on the top, 5 little trays, each holding something called a flow cell, which looks like a slim cell phone. And there's a bog-standard computer monitor to one side where you can see some of the DNA data that's being read directly from liquid samples that have been squirted into those flow cells. The technology is amazingly clever.
Really a very, very, very fine film.
But to be honest,
what we call a flow cell.
You don't need to follow the finer details about how there are these
holes made out of particular proteins.
And
the DNA molecule is pulled through a hole.
Where a tiny electrical sensor reads the molecule.
The signal is called a wiggle.
And then these wiggles are spat out and...
translated by computers well beyond my understanding into the individual A's, T's, C's and G's, which represent what the genome of the COVID virus was. That process is pretty magical.
It was magical machines like this that were running night and day during the pandemic to crack the RNA codes written inside each SARS-CoV-2 virus. With that information, scientists could track the evolving COVID family tree, all those mutant offspring that might be nastier or more infectious or better at evading vaccines or, if we were lucky, might be more benign. And the thing is, like David Winter said, this kind of testing is still going on 6 years down the track. Because the COVID virus, as it goes round and round the country and round the world, is still changing, still mutating. These days, just about every COVID virus on the planet is descended from the Omicron variant that smashed its way through MIQ at the end of 2021, then rampaged around New Zealand in a matter of months. But there's an army of scientists all over the world still keeping an eye out for a new potential variant of concern. So throughout the pandemic, COVID kept on changing, but at the same time, it was changing us. So that's one of the things we'll try to wrap our heads around in this final episode, the ways that COVID changed our bodies and immune systems, the ways it changed our society, the way it changed us as people during those 2 and a bit deeply strange years when a virus forced New Zealand to become a quarantine nation.
The year is 2020 and a deadly pandemic is raging all across the globe. We are locked inside, we are terrified, we are baking sourdough. We've been living on Zoom in our living room since the lockdown was declared. Societies are bended, our commitments are suspended. It's all unprecedented and nobody's prepared for a quarantine nation. Now 6 years later, what have we learned? It's a quarantine nation. Will a sense of normality ever return? In the quarantine
I'm Adam Dudding.
And I'm Eugene Bingham. And this is the final part of Quarantine Nation, a mostly serious history of New Zealand's pandemic years, produced for Stuff by Te Pūrongo Productions. Episode 8, Legacy.
Hey, just before we leave Dr. David Winter and all that genomic stuff, so this is pretty niche as patriotic pride goes, but there's one thing he told us that did take our fancy. It turns out that even now, years on from the peak of the pandemic, New Zealand does COVID a little differently from other countries.
New Zealand has quite weird variants sometimes. One of these was a so-called Deltacron, so it was a combination of a Delta and an Omicron virus. So we had this hybrid, effectively, which went extinct very quickly in the rest of the world and just circulated at a low level in New Zealand for months and months and months. Right now we have a variant which is common in New Zealand and rare elsewhere in the world, MC.10, and it's spawning off new little mutations even now. There's something a little bit different maybe about our background, the things our community has been exposed to previously, the vaccines that we've had at different times, that mean we definitely have novel New Zealand-specific variants arising.
Anyway, on with the show.
So in my head, when I think about the pandemic, it's in three parts.
Juliet Gerard, Chief Science Advisor to Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern throughout the pandemic.
The beginning, the middle and the end, imaginative titles. So the beginning we've talked about, and I think that was a win. So we got through the first part. The middle was where we were largely open. We were a bit smug because the rest of the world was locked down and we weren't. We had a window of opportunity to prepare for the virus coming in. Whether we did that as well as we could have done, I don't know. The fact that we got the vaccine, we being the global community, in the time we did, is astonishing. I had guessed 5 years when asked to put a time frame on it, and it was, 2? It was amazing. So that bit went well. And then in the end, things started to fray, right? So that's when the social cohesion went, support for lockdowns dropped off, misinformation flared, and you started to see the consequence of all those dramatic actions. That said, I think the whole world saw those same consequences, irrespective of the policy they had. People were pretty grumpy because they'd been locked up with or without lots of people dying around them, right? But it's definitely three phases. The triumphant beginning, the kind of long, muddled middle, and then the end where we finally let it in was harder to process.
And that's where we got to at the end of episode 7, right? It's early 2022, and there's a lot of things happening at once. Vaccination has gone pretty well. We're up past 90% coverage. But Omicron has arrived, and though vaccination still reduces the severity of the illness, fact is, Omicron doesn't care that you've had the jab. You're getting COVID regardless, which is hardly helpful at a time when there's a chunk of the population who are not that keen on getting vaccinated, but have grudgingly done it anyway because they've been told the vaccine will prevent infection.
People had invested a lot of emotional energy in waiting for the vaccine, getting the vaccine, and then there was what? I can still catch it? What's with that? And immunology is famously difficult to explain.
Yeah, Susie Wiles was the pandemic's explainer-in-chief, and even she was struggling.
The virus mutated, became Omicron, and it was just like, all bets are off. And that was really, really hard, I think, because it was almost like we didn't have enough time to actually explain to people now why they were getting infected. And I think maybe lots of people lost their confidence in the vaccines, maybe lost their confidence in us because they were like, well, you said. And it's like, well, that's what it was last week. And now it's not because the virus has changed.
Thing is, in that first bit of 2022, mandates to encourage vaccination are still happening, and they're sort of working. But because of Omicron, they're also sort of too late. And they've also made a lot of people pretty angry about losing their jobs and being bossed about.
So you are going to do this to us over the common cold.
And that, along with some general sentiment that's a bit anti-government,
This is Jacinda's world.
a bit anti-vax, a bit anti-lockdown, and, in some cases, a bit anti-reality, there's that protest in the grounds of Parliament that runs from early Feb to early March and which just turns septic. Sure, at times there was a carnival atmosphere, But when protesters are calling for the hanging of those involved in running the COVID response, you know things have curdled.
Where are you, Jacinda? All is we wanted you to come out and talk now. Your parliament's on fire. Look at what you've caused, Jacinda, to your own people.
Early March, that protest is forcibly broken up and Parliament grounds are cleared. But oddly, at the very moment that the protest is at its most strident, it's clear that Aotearoa's COVID response is already being unwound, and pretty quickly. Border controls have been softening since February, things like allowing arrivals from Australia to self-isolate rather than use MIQ.
By the end of March, MIQ in general is all but over. Numerous countries and categories of traveller are designated quarantine-free, and the whole voucher system that drove so many people nuts ends.
Then, through April, the restrictions requiring people to show vaccine passes are unwound, and in May, travel gets even easier. Kiwis abroad who'd refused to get vaccinated are no longer blocked from coming home.
June, the very last MIQ facilities are shut down.
July, the borders are fully open.
August, cruise ships are back.
September, the traffic light system, which no one really ever understood or properly observed, ends, along with all vaccination mandates.
And in October 2022, the Epidemic Preparedness Notice, a crucial piece of paper that for the past 2.5 years has empowered the government to do all sorts of wild things, like shut borders, boss businesses about, force people to hang out in hotels or wear masks. The legal basis for all of that is brought to a close. On paper, at least, New Zealand's COVID pandemic is over.
The ironic thing, of course, is that all this happens just as, for the very first time, New Zealand actually experiences some serious rates of COVID death. That's no surprise, of course. As epidemiologist Michael Baker puts it,
we'd moved into, you'd have to say, a mitigation phase, and we were back to saying we're trying to flatten the curve, we're not trying to eliminate it.
Flattening the curve means bowing to what is now inevitable, really widespread infection by Omicron. And with widespread infection, even a very low proportion of fatal cases can add up to a big number of deaths. So after those relatively tiny tolls of 26 in 2020 and 24 in 2021, suddenly, in 2022, the annual figure balloons to 2,776. If the world hadn't just been through what the world has just been through, I guess you'd find that kind of horrifying. A disease has swept through the country and killed almost 3,000 people in total. But even looking back now, it feels like a lot of us barely noticed it was happening. And I guess that's just because of the context. The utter carnage we'd seen abroad, plus the relief so many of us felt about a return to some kind of normality at last.
And look, today, 6 years on, with COVID considered endemic here for good, it's still killing people. Around 1,000 deaths in 2023, another 600 or so in 2024. All up, around 5,000 New Zealanders have died of COVID.
All the same, by mid-2022, COVID-19, the pandemic, the catastrophe, the profound disruption to everyone's lives is over. Kind of.
See, I think COVID, I think it's gone, innit? I'm pretty sure it's over. I don't know if it is. I think there's still lockdowns in China, but it's fucked off home after a successful world tour. It's back.
Well, at least over enough that Scottish comedian Kevin Bridges could get away with that in his stand-up. That's from 2022.
Killed 6 million people. Wow. I know, it's big numbers, but I don't know if that's Hall of Fame.
Too soon? Evidently not. And it sometimes feels like the world's made a collective decision to move on, to put COVID behind us, to not dwell on all that misery and death, to not think about it too much.
But at the same time,
during COVID,
because of COVID,
the COVID overhang,
the impact of COVID on
we can't escape the reminders that it did happen, including this.
The first phase of the Royal Commission of Inquiry was presented to Government, and it found
this.
Phase 2 of the Royal Commission of Inquiry was ordered by the current government.
Because, New Zealand has had not one, but 2 phases of a Royal Commission of Inquiry into the COVID-19 pandemic. The first one heard evidence through 2023, but before it had even reported back, there was an election, which Labour lost, and part of the winning coalition's platform was a promise to do a second phase, which was tightly focused on vaccines, mandates and lockdowns, especially the big Auckland and Northland one of August 2021. The more contentious stuff, basically. Which meant last year, when we were asking people like Michael Baker to rummage through his pandemic memories, second team of commissioners was getting him to do precisely the same thing.
I was delighted we were having a Royal Commission to look at our pandemic preparedness, which had been overall, I thought, pretty woeful for COVID-19. I was surprised that a second phase was proposed by the incoming government because it seemed like a lot of money to spend on an add-on that may not add a great deal. I've now interacted with both quite closely and I actually think the second phase of the Royal Commission is adding value. And I think it does provide an opportunity for some groups who feel they didn't have a very good voice early on to actually make submissions and go to a hearing.
Baker's right. In this phase, the commissioners certainly did hear from some groups that didn't get much of a look in the first phase. Groups like the anti-vaccine and anti-mandate group Voices for Freedom, which published misinformation about vaccines throughout the pandemic and which was one of the key groups involved in organising the Parliament protest. I think you can hear some of the frustration from Nicolette Levy KC, one of the Commission's lawyers, during this public hearing from July 2025, as she tries to pin down Voices for Freedom's views about some of the most basic of facts concerning the COVID pandemic.
Do you dispute or accept the widely held view and published by the World Health Organization that the COVID-19 pandemic caused millions of deaths worldwide?
So before I can answer the question, I'll need to understand more about that quote. In which country? Is it all countries? For which time period? How many millions of lives was being said to be saved? I am aware.
This evident misunderstanding of the question goes on for a while, then Nicolette Levy tries again.
So you've answered my question with a question. To come back to my question, from the work that you have done, the studies that you have looked at and the experts that you have consulted, do you dispute or accept the widely held view that the COVID-19 pandemic caused millions of deaths worldwide?
It's certainly what is put out there, and that's when it's quite a complex issue, because you have the claim that COVID-19 caused a whole lot of deaths, but there are issues with reporting, and so there is the whole notion of somebody died with COVID or from COVID.
So we're still not getting far. A little later, Grant Illingworth KC, one of the three commissioners, has another crack at this seemingly simple question.
Just going back to early 2020, many New Zealanders will have seen on television what was happening in China, countries like Italy and the UK, where the reporting was that many thousands of people were dying from the original COVID virus. Do you agree that that reporting happened, and do you agree that that was genuine reporting?
Do you want to? I mean, we do cover that in our booklet here, but
can I get yeah.
Well, I agree that it was reported, but like I was saying before, that there were the issues surrounding the with COVID, from COVID, and each of the different countries had their own situation that had.
Illingworth tries to make the question even simpler.
Do you seriously expect the people of New Zealand to accept that the deaths that were being reported internationally were not genuinely from COVID?
Well, we're not disputing that there are not people. We've answered that question, that there were deaths. We're simply saying that it gets very complex, especially when people are being funded in order to tick a box to say that a death was COVID.
But he's still not getting much clarity.
You seem to be avoiding the question of whether there were, in fact, many thousands of people who died from COVID in that early period. Now, I'm putting it to you as straightforwardly as I can. Do you dispute that?
No doubt there were, as there are every year with flus and things like that. And yes, it might have been a particularly bad instance of that. We're not disputing that. We're not saying that there's some great conspiracy and none of these people died. That's not what we're saying. We were just saying that there are factors that need to be looked at.
The manner in which they classified the deaths. But I think all of that, you can look forward and say, there is that method.
That was from the public hearings for Phase 2, and that final Phase 2 report is due in February 2026. But the report of the first phase has already been published, and it came to pretty similar conclusions to what had been reported in real time through the pandemic. And on balance, it was pretty positive about the government response, for all the familiar reasons. Our health response led to one of the lowest death rates in the OECD. Our lockdowns were seriously stringent, but were briefer than in many comparable countries. The economy took a terrible hit, just like everywhere else in the world, but New Zealand recovered relatively well, through to the end of 2022 at least. Education was hugely disrupted, but because of the elimination of the virus in the middle there, the days missed and other educational disruption was less than in many comparable countries.
The inquiry wasn't a whitewash though. It was really critical about our lack of readiness before the pandemic, about the fact that certain groups, including Māori and Pacifica, were disproportionately affected. And yeah, it reckoned the transition from elimination back to suppression as Omicron swept the country was badly planned and badly communicated, which contributed to the messiness of that final stage. Having bought the country almost a year of breathing space by keeping the virus out, the government failed to think hard enough about how the hell they were going to bring the elimination strategy to an end. As for mandates and vaccine passes, probably the most controversial and divisive of all the policies the government put in place, the Commission in Phase 1 reckoned mandates and vaccine passes had been justifiable, but they'd stayed in place too long after Omicron had arrived and made them almost meaningless.
Between that Phase 1 report and then the Phase 2 hearings, 2025 did feel like the year that there was suddenly a lot more talk about COVID in the media. There was one opinion piece in particular that seemed to hit a nerve. In July, shortly after Jacinda Ardern had published her political memoir, A Different Kind of Power, businessman Sir Ian Taylor wrote an open letter to her, published on Stuff, where he saluted Ardern's leadership during the early months of COVID with her buzz phrases of be kind and a team of 5 million. But then he said her messages of unity turned out to be hollow as the pandemic rolled on, as a heartless and inflexible MIQ system divided families. He reckoned the hope and optimism of Ardern's first term and landslide re-election faded fast, and all that was left was brand Jacinda. He was also unimpressed that she'd reportedly pocketed a $1 million advance for her book. Taylor's open letter was one of the most read pieces on Stuff that month and sparked a huge volume of reader comments. Those who leapt in to agree that Ardern had really made a hash of New Zealand's COVID response, and many more who jumped in to ask what on earth Taylor was talking about, given how effectively Ardern's government had saved thousands of lives and done their best to mitigate the consequences. These arguments were hardly new, of course, but their reappearance in the comments section showed the debate was still live. Maybe we do want to move on from COVID, but at the same time, we'll go there at the drop of a hat, arguing the toss and chewing over the rights and wrongs.
But there's another op-ed that was published soon after that by another Stuff columnist, Damien Grant, which I found much more interesting than Ian Taylor's. Damien Grant wrote the column in August in response to something that was going on with the Royal Commission's second phase. A bunch of COVID-era leaders, Jacinda Ardern, Chris Hipkins, Grant Robertson and Aisha Verrill, had all said they didn't want to appear at the public hearings. They said they'd already answered every question they'd been asked in private interviews with the commissioners. That was the starting point. But in his column, Damien Grant actually took aim at the great New Zealand public instead. Grant's views are from the libertarian right. Quite simply, he was totally against lockdowns throughout the pandemic. Personal autonomy, freedom and all that. But he reckoned 5 years on, he was seeing historical revisionism. He was seeing people claiming they were always against the mandates and lockdowns and so on, when actually, at the time, the overwhelming majority of New Zealanders were quite happy to do what they were told, quite willing to yield their personal freedoms for what they saw as the greater good, and as we noted in episode 2, dobbing their neighbours for lockdown breaches.
We're continuing to receive a huge number of reports of potential breaches, which tells us that members of the public clearly want others to comply.
Fact is, wrote Damien Grant, if serious numbers of New Zealanders hadn't wanted to comply with all the new rules that came our way, lockdowns would have collapsed overnight. But they didn't. New Zealanders followed the rules, not because Jacinda Ardern was some kind of tyrant, but because we wanted to.
There's actually a wild legal sidebar which maybe proves this point about compliance. Remember back in episode 2, we also talked about police being able to enforce the lockdown thanks to specific acts.
We've recorded a total of 367 breaches of the Civil Defence Emergency Management or Health Act notices.
Well, although there was very little political pushback against the very first lockdown, one legal eagle took the time to ask not, is this lockdown a good idea, but rather, is this lockdown even legal? The eagle in question was a constitutional expert called Andrew Borrowdale, and he took a case against the government to the High Court because, well, the lockdown obviously impinged very seriously on rights that really matter. Freedom of movement, freedom of assembly, that sort of thing. Sure, the Health Act has bits about special powers during a pandemic, but you've got to be really careful when you're taking away people's fundamental rights. So, soon after that lockdown, so this is July 2020, 3 High Court judges took a close look and wrote an 81-page judgment that concluded, yeah, it was legal to have a lockdown, but there was a 9-day period where officials were publicly telling people they legally must stay at home, but the necessary Health Act order saying this hadn't actually been made. So for 9 days, the lockdown rules we were following, or dobbing each other in for, weren't exactly legal. After those 9 days, Ashley Bloomfield signed a new health order that did make it legal from then on. But still, the High Court judgment was a bit of a rap on the knuckles and a great case for law students to read when learning about the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act.
New Zealand has quite weird experience.
The triumphant beginning, the kind of long muddled middle.
Where are you, Jacinda? All is we wanted you to come out and talk now your parliament.
Back in 2020, when the first waves of people had COVID, there was a group that started to realise they weren't getting better. They found each other on the internet, basically, and they came up with the term long COVID, often called themselves long haulers.
This is
Larissa Hockey. I live in beautiful Tairāwhiti, Gisborne. I spent the last 10, 12 years homeschooling my kids. Now I'm living with long COVID, so a bit limited, so a lot of stuff from home.
Like she says, Larissa lives with the post-viral syndrome long COVID.
Long COVID is still not fully understood.
Michael Baker again.
It does appear that this virus does have receptors throughout the body that it latches onto. So there's a whole combination of forms of pathology in terms of how it operates.
Larissa's long COVID dates back to September 2020, when her husband was at a conference up in Auckland and she joined him midway.
When I got there, he'd already picked up a bug. There had been a bit of COVID in Auckland at the time, so we're kind of jokingly like, oh gosh, maybe you've got COVID.
Spoiler alert, indeed he had. They headed home where the virus made its way through the family. Their teenage son and one of their 2 teenage daughters got sick, then Larissa herself.
Eventually, my son, so he was 17 at the time, my 13-year-old daughter and I were all in bed. And my 15-year-old daughter was helping my husband to just keep everything going.
Then that daughter got it too. But while Larissa's husband seemed to recover okay, she and the 3 teens, not so much. The symptoms?
Nauseous, headaches, body aches.
Just wouldn't quit. And the fatigue, the endless, overwhelming fatigue.
I could get myself from the bed to the couch to the bathroom. That was it. And the same for my kids. Just terrifying.
This went on for month after month after month.
No one really knew what was going on. Blood tests are all normal. And then I saw a news article with Dr. Anna Brooks, and she was talking about long COVID. And I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds just like us. So I got in touch with her, joined the Facebook group.
There, Larissa learned a bit more about the bewildering array of symptoms that fall under the banner of long COVID and which are believed to be affecting millions of people around the world. She now advocates for sufferers as part of the group Long COVID Support Aotearoa.
It's basically an umbrella term covering about 200 different symptoms. The most common are the fatigue and post-exertional malaise.
Other symptoms include anxiety, brain fog, breathing difficulties,
depression, dizziness, fatigue.
Larissa is literally reading the alphabetical list here off her support group's website.
Loss of taste.
One of the problems when talking about long COVID is there isn't clear agreement on which symptoms count. The WHO, the CDC and New Zealand's Ministry of Health all have slightly different definitions, though fatigue, malaise, brain fog and sleep problems all feature high up in their lists.
There's probably about 250,000 people in New Zealand with long COVID. But some of them are just going to be not feeling their best. Some of them will have ongoing headaches. It's not stopping them from getting on with their lives. But without the government tracking who is affected, we don't have the numbers on how many are actually bedridden or have lost their jobs.
In Larissa's support organisation,
these are the sorts of questions we are asking, and often there is no information.
It seems the worse your initial infection, the greater the chance of long COVID. So a lot of the most severe cases Larissa knows about are in people who got COVID early on, before vaccines and before the arrival of less lethal variants such as Omicron. But on the other hand, Larissa says there's also research suggesting each time you get reinfected with COVID, there's an additional chance of developing long COVID.
People who don't get long COVID the first time or the second time or the third time might get it on the fourth time. So it is definitely still happening.
In the past year, things have got a bit better for Larissa.
I'm not quite riding my horse yet, but I can have a coffee with a friend now. I can do the dishes. Who would have thought that would be exciting? It makes you really grateful for every little thing you get back.
After our interview, Larissa emailed us a voice memo because there were just a few more things about long COVID she really wanted to be understood by anyone who might be listening.
There are people out there who are concerned about vaccines, and basically they assume that everyone with long COVID is actually vaccine injured. And so we get a lot of abuse really every time there's an article about long COVID in the comments. And I guess I'd just like to be able to say to people, yes, we understand vaccine injury is real, but so is long COVID from the virus. All the first people in the group were from that first wave of COVID who didn't receive vaccines. So they got sick before vaccines. And that's the case with me as well. In my family, we all got sick before vaccines came along. So, yeah, I guess I'm just keen for people to lay off that aspect of things a bit. You know, we don't need to have a hard time every time there's an article out there. Long COVID is real, it's caused by the virus. So yeah, just thought pass that on.
The interviews we did for this podcast often focused on the most dramatic bits of the pandemic. Where were you when you first heard about COVID? What was it like as your world was turned upside down? But naturally, we also wanted to know what happened next. And one thing that really struck us when hearing from people who were part of the health and science response to the virus was how often this theme came up.
Pretty burnt out.
I was very, very burnt out.
It was very tiring. I burnt out a little bit.
I've suffered from burnout.
Burnout. For some people, the deep exhaustion that comes from weeks or months or years of being always on, always vigilant, working too many hours, juggling too many problems. For some, burnout was a warning sign, a message that they should take a little break, then head back to the front line. For others, it was something bigger, a prompt to change direction altogether.
I've moved on from academia since working in the COVID response.
In the years since COVID, Sean Hendy's career has changed direction. High-speed modelling of infection data was...
all adrenaline, on all the time. So, I burnt out a little bit.
He's now Chief Science Officer for an environmentally focused startup called Toha Network.
So I'm working much more on the environment and around climate If there's another pandemic, I will probably pick up the pen and paper again and work on that. But it's kind of changed my focus as a scientist.
Like so many of the people who came to be seen as somehow connected to the system that had brought us lockdowns and vaccines, Hendy has received
a lot of hate mail.
But equally,
a lot of people do come up to you and thank you. I had one experience. I'd been at a work do, left the restaurant, checking that one of my colleagues was going to pay, and then one of the staff ran after me, and I thought, they think I'm doing a runner. But no, the staff member just wanted to say thanks for all you did. You know, those nice things happen.
Ashley Bloomfield stepped down as Director General of Health at the end of July 2022. Almost immediately there was
this sense of this enormous weight being lifted from my shoulders and realising that I'd carried this responsibility really on my shoulders mentally and physically. And so it was less than a week later my wife said to me, "You look 5 years younger already." It was an incredibly intense and long period to sort of be in a role like that.
Bloomfield is now Chief Executive of PHF Science, what used to be ESR, leading some of those very scientists whose round-the-clock work had informed what he was able to tell the nation from his pandemic podium day after day.
Josh Freeman, the guy who blew the whistle on a rickety testing system and helped figure out how COVID was spreading inside MIQ, says 2 years on high alert ground him down.
I've got to be honest, it was quite a major personal impact that it had on me. The satisfaction was working with a great team of people, great colleagues, and I think the sort of sense of accomplishment was great. But yeah, I was pretty burnt out. I think in general, New Zealand did very, very well, not just by public health metrics, but on other health, social and economic metrics. Remembering, people got to understand there's no easy way through a pandemic. It's like getting cancer. There's no easy way through it. It's like getting a population diagnosis of some serious illness. The treatment's tough, but you've got to say, what's the best treatment? It wasn't easy for New Zealand, but it could have been a lot worse. A lot worse.
Of course, New Zealand's most famous COVID burnout of all was the one at the very top.
I am leaving because with such a privileged role comes responsibility. The responsibility to know when you are the right person to lead and also when you are not. And so today I'm announcing that I will not be seeking re-election and that my term as Prime Minister will conclude no later than the 7th of February.
This is Jacinda Ardern in January 2023.
But I'm not leaving because it was hard. Had that been the case, I probably would have departed 2 months into the job. I know what this job takes, and I know that I no longer have enough in the tank to do it justice.
When Ardern spoke on Stuff's Kiwi Yarns podcast recently, she said her decision to stand down, effectively handing the Labour leadership over to Chris Hipkins, who'd then go on to lose the 2023 election, wasn't just because of COVID.
The pandemic was part of it, but not singularly. 5 years of leadership felt like 10. That's probably what I would say. COVID, though, in terms of its impact, there's no doubt it was incredibly hard to lead through, in part because you could see how hard it was for everyone else. As much as you were trying to make the best possible decision, the thing that you thought was the right thing to do, inevitably there were consequences for people and people didn't always believe it was the right thing to do.
Susie Wiles' burnout wasn't simply because of the 3,000 plus interviews she did on the science of COVID in the first couple of years. She also became a particular target of some of the most vicious trolls, online and offline.
The threats were, they came from everywhere, didn't they? They were online.
In person, on my phone, in my emails. It was absolutely relentless. Really, really horrible, really awful stuff. And then being put on the Nuremberg 2.0 list. So this is a list of people that a certain group of people want basically prosecuted and then executed for crimes against humanity. And that was horrible.
What did you have to do to protect yourself?
I just became a bit of a hermit, really. When we got security cameras and stuff at home, but I just ended up kind of retreating, really, away from people, which to an extent I still am a little bit hermity. Got a little alarm on my bag. We certainly reported stuff to the police. I don't answer my phone to numbers I don't recognise anymore. I do occasionally just keep up with the social media stuff just to check in, and there's still like this. People are just obsessed. Like just a couple of days ago, there was somebody having a go, and it's like, oh my God, like they're never going to forget me. However many years later, despite the fact that I've said nothing COVID related for quite some time.
Fun fact about Susie Wiles, the COVID explainer to The Nation, when we interviewed her, she had still never had COVID. That's quite a feat given how widespread Omicron infections have become. It's estimated 80% of all New Zealanders have caught it at least once. Avoiding it is something that's required real effort on Susie's part.
Yeah, so I mask when I'm in public. If I'm going to be meeting with people, then we do rat tests beforehand.
Yeah, we did rat tests the morning that we interviewed Susie.
Though it was pretty academic in my case. That week I actually came down with a really nasty cold, not COVID. And rather than coughing all over our microbiologist guest, I FaceTimed in to the interview.
But anyway, back to Susie.
I use ventilation as a tool. We have windows and doors open. We don't eat in indoor places.
And because the Stuff Studio is very much an indoor place, what have we got here on the table?
This is a little air purifier. So it basically takes the air in. It's got a HEPA filter and then essentially captures viruses and bacteria and releases clean air out the other side. And that's what we should have in every ventilation system, especially in rooms like this where we're sealed in together.
All these precautions because
the reality is that the pandemic hasn't ended. I mean, the emergency phase of the pandemic has ended and we're now essentially in the kind of chronic phase. And what we have now is a new infectious disease that's circulating that is still causing a huge damage to people. You know, when there's a paper just come out recently about the brain damage that COVID causes, you know, we call it things like brain fog. It's not fog, it's damage. It impacts people's memory. And I don't want that for me. I don't want that for anybody. And so part of wearing a mask is about protecting me, but it's also signaling to everybody else, hey, something's still going on here. And, you know, we've just abandoned so many people, all of those with long COVID, all of those who are immunocompromised and, you know, still need us to be taking precautions. We've abandoned them all. And that makes me immensely sad.
Otago's Gemma Geoghegan says if COVID taught us anything, it's that basic science, the kind where you're investigating fundamental principles rather than chasing a specific usage or technology. Basic science turns out to be incredibly useful in a crisis.
In the genomics, it was all basic science. And the field of phylogenetics and genomics was never thinking, oh, a phylogenetic tree might save lives one day.
But it did. And Gemma fears that lesson is already being forgotten.
People have very short memories, and people in charge care about that really short time frame of election cycles.
So it bothers her that applicants to a blue sky research funder like the Marsden Fund are now being required to demonstrate the specific economic benefits of a project.
You never know where science is going to lead. And so defunding certain things is a real problem.
Genomic testing helps shorten or even avoid potential lockdowns. That's your economic benefit right there. But who could have predicted that back when the basic science was being figured out years or decades earlier?
I think we need to remind people of that.
There's so much that's happened. I was painted. An artist in the UK said he wanted to paint some frontline workers that was hung up in the portrait museum. So that was absolute madness.
It's Nurse Jenny McGee again. And yeah, her accidental involvement in Boris Johnson's COVID saga kept things interesting literally for years.
I think I came through COVID relatively unscathed because this attention that I got really took my mind off things. All of the fan mail and all of the things that have happened over the years, I think it's finished. Like, I think that, you know, that chapter's all kind of done, and then, you know, I'm running to do a podcast. So it just goes on and on and on.
But there's also the song, you were going to send me the link.
Oh, yes, I will. Yes.
Jenny did send it in the end, but actually, we're not going to play it because it's a parody of Eminem's The Real Slim Shady. You know, will the real Nurse Jenny please stand up? And New Zealanders know what happens when people use music that's Eminem-esque. Trust us though, it's very good. There were several Nurse Jenny songs created and posted online. There was a documentary team that followed her around from late 2020.
They filmed me throughout the second wave.
And they were still following her when, rather burnt out and sick of her working conditions and annoyed by a measly pay offer to NHS workers, she decided to leave the UK and go work in the Caribbean for a while, all of which was captured in the doco.
And the documentary came out and it was huge news.
Shock horror, Boris's favourite nurse bails from the NHS kind of thing.
But at this point I was kind of tucked away in a Caribbean island I'd ever heard of. I remember being at breakfast one morning and this other British girl who was out there was like, "Hey, you're Jenny?" And I was like, "Yes." She's like, "Do you realise you're on the front of all the newspapers in the UK?" And I was like, "Yeah, shush, don't tell them where I am."
In 2022, Jenny made her way through MIQ for a trip home to stay with her parents in Nelson. And her mother arranged for her famous daughter to speak at a women's volunteer organisation.
The fundraiser for me to come and talk to people about my experiences. So it was a room full of retirees and just talking through the realities of what I went through and pointing out to people that we take it for granted that if we get unwell, we can go to a hospital and get treatment. I'd say, did people realise that if you rocked up to hospital in the middle of COVID and it hit like it did in London, if you were over the age of 70, you wouldn't have been put on a ventilator? And people had no idea. In a place like Nelson, which is a huge retirement community and very little ventilators, you wouldn't have been put on a ventilator probably. That's what happened overseas and I lived that. So, yeah, people were upset. At the end, just people coming up and saying, "Oh my God, no idea it was that bad." People cried.
Do you think New Zealanders are naive about the bullet that they dodged?
Yeah, I think some people understand, but perhaps, New Zealand's so she'll be right, it'll be okay. I do think people are naive to it.
Do you have any time for the argument that New Zealand paid too high a price for those saved lives in 2020 and 2021 because we tanked the economy, we ruined kids' schooling, we broke the social cohesion, we excluded a cohort of the population with the mandates?
Yeah.
You have any time for any of those arguments?
The same thing's happening in the UK. It's happening all over the world. At least we saved lives. I think what New Zealand did was incredible.
Rebecca Rowland, the American who bailed from a forest walk because of lockdown, then completed it 9 months later in a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle outfit, she finally made a much-delayed exit from our quarantine nation after Jacinda Ardern announced another lockdown.
It was August of 2021 when she said the whole country was going back into lockdown. So I was living in Nelson at the time, and I just said, I cannot mentally do that again.
There's a little bit of notice before everything shuts down, so Rebecca books her journey back to the US.
So I had a flight out of Nelson, and I go to the airport, and the airport's closed. They just canceled my flight, and I'm like frantic.
There is, however, a flight you can take from Christchurch, 4 hours drive away, but it leaves in 5.5. So she begs a flatmate to drive her.
So we had to get in the car and go. I was like, this is my opportunity to leave. So he drove me and I made it just in time. And I was so relieved. And then I got home and my little brother picked me up from the airport and he had COVID and he gave me COVID. And so then I had to separate myself from my family and my friends that I had not seen in 3.5 years and had to isolate for 10 days by myself.
As it happens, this bout of COVID is pretty mild.
I felt a little run down, but I thought it was just the jet lag. And then my brother tested positive, and then I tested positive, and I'm like, what are the chances of this?
Well, given the rates of COVID in the US by late 2021, you'd have to say the chances were pretty high. But anyway, Rebecca is keen to keep adventuring, so she gets her vaccinations.
And then I immediately got on a plane and I went to Portugal to go the length of that country on a push scooter.
Push scooter through Portugal in the middle of a pandemic? Why not? A bucket list is a powerful drug. Rebecca's move from zero COVID New Zealand to COVID-saturated America is an eye-opener.
So when I was in New Zealand, all of the news and the media was making COVID out to be just this really scary virus and people weren't living their everyday lives.
But then when I went back to the US, people were just living with COVID being present. Everything seemed a lot more normal. No one wearing masks, everyone's still going out, everyone had learned to live with it.
And did that feel positive, negative, or just confusing?
I found it to be more of a positive because even though I did get it, I got it over with. And then I was able just to be back in society, and it felt normal almost, of just being able to still go out, see my friends, and be present and not having to wear a mask and isolate.
Marcus Gower of Zoom council meeting fame, he's still on the Waipa District Council and pretty relaxed about the fact that as community engagement goes, they will probably never outdo that one random meeting of the Corporate and Finance Committee.
I had to rewatch the meeting and try to get my head around what happened. Like, what? Why?
Marcus survived the various lockdowns just fine.
Coffee's over the fence with my neighbour, so we'd catch up on the driveway and have a coffee every morning. So that was quite nice.
Also,
becoming a professional alcoholic, that was exciting times, ordering your wine delivery, trying to compensate that with the free Les Mills workouts on TVNZ.
But Marcus was really saddened by the messy ending when unity broke down. He thought vaccine mandates were an acceptable attempt to try to protect everybody, but
the vitriol and the amount of angst, and we had to get security teams to look after our libraries and our front counter staff because people just weren't being reasonable. And I think if you have to hire security staff for your libraries and your pools and stuff, I mean, like, have you ever met a librarian that you just didn't want to give a hug to? The fact that we went in there is pretty disappointing.
Disagreements about vaccines and mandates affected personal relationships too.
It divided my family, those who had the vaccines and who didn't. I've got some family members that we've just agreed that we won't talk about certain subjects now because it just doesn't go anywhere.
Up north, the Tai Tokoro border control checkpoints that Nais Manuel stood up alongside Hone Harawera, they were wound up for good in early 2022.
We felt our people had prepared themselves well enough now to identify what COVID is and how to manage it. As time got on and people were getting vaccinated or not, they knew how to manage themselves.
So the decision was made to call it a day, though for a while it did feel weird to be just letting visitors through again.
It was quite traumatising leading our communities back into that again. They got really nervous when they started seeing manuhiri showing up. It's because Tai Tokiro was able to keep COVID out for a very long time.
The networks that had been established over 2 years didn't just disappear. A year later, when Cyclone Gabrielle came through, they were reactivated.
The beauty about community and hapu and iwi in isolated places like the far north and Te Tai Tokiro, we really rely on each other as a network, whether it be the fight against kaulurpa.
That's a tropical seaweed that became a big biosecurity problem.
Whether it be Cyclone Gabrielle, Cyclone Tam, we have a network that is already created. If we need action, we've got a crew, over 200 people that are ready to go. The kumara vine is way stronger, I tell you. Yeah, I can tell you what the aunties are up to over in Pangaru before you can make the phone call on the kumara vine. It's great.
TV presenter Hilary Barry, who kept breaking out the tiara and smiles long after she'd grown tired of lockdowns. She says COVID has left some legacies, big and small.
I wash my hands religiously still. I do hand wash a lot more.
Given that she is, as she put it,
a very, very familiar face.
She does sometimes miss one thing from the height of the pandemic.
I was recently, where was I recently? And I missed not having a mask because I couldn't be bothered engaging with people. I was just having one of those days where you just feel a bit, and it's like, oh, I've got to go down the supermarket. Oh, God. And I longed to wear a mask. Isn't that terrible? What else has changed?
Bigger picture, yeah. COVID has been really corrosive.
I think it's made us a lot more divided. I think people are quick to anger rather than listening to each other. They decide on a point of view and they won't be moved from that point of view. Social media has played a large part in that because people had so much time on their hands, and we know the algorithms are all set up to send people down rabbit holes. I feel a sense of sadness over that. I copped a hell of a lot of abuse over COVID because I had, I believe and still believe, done the right thing and supported the rollout of the vaccine. But the interesting thing about it is this. With all the vitriol that I got over all of those months, and some of it was really nasty to the point of TVNZ saying to me, do you want security at your house? They were really concerned. So nasty. But in all the time since we've been locked down and all the years since, has one person ever come up to me in the flesh and given me grief? No, not one. That says a couple of things. It says to me, I think, that there aren't as large a number of people online who are that vitriolic. It's a small group of people with an ability to speak very loudly. And the other thing it says to me is that it's very easy to sit at home and say really awful things. I mean, death threats, really like just the most disgusting things, but they haven't got the guts to come up to you and say that to your face. And so it takes a lot of the power out of it because you think, oh my gosh, I can never leave the house again. And then you go, oh, I can absolutely leave the house, because actually the small number of people who are creating a little shitstorm over here actually haven't got the balls up to come up to me and have a conversation.
Jack Buchanan, of Lockdown Boogie fame, sees the scars from the pandemic all around him.
There was that crazy golden period in 2020 where, 85% of the country agreed that we were doing the right thing. And then the following election was a crazy, majority government, which never happens. And we had this period of feeling really united as a country. And then things just went really quickly and really far in the opposite direction. And I think we're still there. It feels harder to have conversations with people who disagree with you. It feels like no one is going to budge an inch. And I think a lot of that is, not all, but I think a lot of that is down to what we went through as a country in the COVID times. And I don't know what the way back from that is, because it is happening globally as well.
Which is why we're going to have to find something really cheerful for the end of episode 8, because we can't end on that note.
Yeah. Don't worry, the world's fucked. See ya.
However, once put under pressure to find something upbeat for the end of episode 8, Jack says that personally, going viral with a silly lockdown song did change his life for the better.
It probably just made me reassess my skills, whereas I think before that point, I was just pursuing a career as an actor and I was focusing on theatre and I just wanted to work in that territory. COVID made that impossible. So suddenly, and I think a lot of people did this, you had to find other things you could do. And I found I really enjoyed some of those things. My whole career trajectory since then has been a bit different. And I think that's a really good thing.
There's the positive note we're looking for. Don't worry, everyone. Jack's fine.
Don't worry. Jack writes songs now. It's all good.
Look, it is great that Jack writes songs now, but I reckon we can probably come up with something a bit more substantial. Starting with something we stumbled across while listening through those old episodes of our lockdown podcast, Coronavirus NZ.
And I know one thing about you is you love watching sport, so how are you coping?
I am not coping, actually, Eugene. Thank you for asking. So
sorry for bringing it up.
It's got that bad that I'm now watching marble racing. It's a thing. It's a thing.
Yeah, marble racing. This is our former staff colleague, Carmen Parahi, who dialed in from under her duvet fort on Waiheke Island to talk to us about the 1918 flu pandemic and the iwi checkpoints up north and marble racing.
And can I say, you can waste 5 minutes of watching these marbles racing on these homemade tracks and you're thinking, come on, little blue guy, come on, little blue guy. You've got, oh, why did you go that way?
Personally, I didn't catch up on this spectacle, but it did impress me that even though sport had been temporarily banned on much of the planet, people who loved sport weren't downcast. They weren't going to let some stupid virus ruin everything. They were going to get creative, build a racetrack, set up a camera and...
Front sends you back to center. Now into lap number 9.
Race marbles.
Galactic and the Hazers up in front.
Sure, we needed to combat the virus directly. In Italy, a desperate fight to save the lives of people already needing ventilators. In New Zealand, a lockdown. In Sweden, some voluntary guidance to avoid crowds. In Taiwan, a super efficient contact tracing system born of the memory of SARS. And in some places like the US and the UK, some incredible work by scientists and health workers that managed to offset somewhat the shocking complacency of some political leaders. So yeah, when COVID came along, there was a political response, a health response, a science response. But there was another COVID response, right? The one that said, if the stadium's closed, we're going to roll marbles.
And Starry, getting the win.
If we're locked in our houses, we're going to watch Tiger King.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Joe Exotic and this is Sarge.
And play murder mystery games over Zoom.
This was the human response to COVID, and for all the grimness and social division and misinformation and rabbit holes we're all still having to reckon with now, for all that we might prefer to just forget about this awful global disaster, this thing that, as Josh put it,
it's like getting cancer. There's no easy way through it.
For all that, we should remember the things that COVID proved we could do, that we could help each other.
Delivered parcels, knocked on the doors and just let them know.
And we could maintain social connection.
The thing where everyone went and sat in deck chairs at the end of their driveways.
We should remember how a fictional Ghostbuster was hired to spread messages for the greater good.
Karen wrote a song, 2 metres please, 2 metres please.
While others appointed themselves the nation's cheerer-uppers.
I dusted off my 7th form ball dress.
And of course, we should remember the people who were sharpening their pencils to figure out what the virus might do next.
Suddenly we became aware we were beating the virus and the curve was turning.
And the army of scientists who were working out where the virus was hiding.
We were chasing an outbreak. We were sequencing every case.
Or how it was spreading.
Meanwhile, they're standing in this plume of aerosols.
And we should remember those who had the thankless job of trying to decide what we should do next.
Pacing around the room and thinking, we've just got to move quickly, we've got to move quickly.
It took 101 years after the 1918 flu pandemic for Aotearoa New Zealand to hold that ceremony in a park to mark this half-forgotten catastrophe with a plaque that read, E kore rawa rātou e warewaretia. They will never be forgotten.
Everyone was sick. No one to help. They were dying one after the other.
Maybe we'll move a bit faster when it comes to commemorating this pandemic. Maybe we'll make a bit more effort not to forget the hard lessons we were forced to learn starting in early 2020, the lessons from our quarantine nation.
The year is 2020 and a deadly pandemic is raging all across the globe. We are locked inside, we are terrified, we are baking sourdough.
That was the 8th and final episode of Quarantine Nation, produced for Stuff by Te Pūrongo Productions. For more about Quarantine Nation, as well as links to feature articles and extended videos of some of our key interviews, go to www.stuff.co.nz/QN. It was researched, written, hosted and produced by Adam Dudding and Eugene Bingham of Te Pūrongo Productions, with additional research by Connor Scott. Thanks again to Te Karere and the TVNZ Digital Production Library, as well as Stuff for all the memories, and to Brody Kane Media and Stuff for the clip from the Kiwi Yarns podcast. Oh, and the YouTube channel Yella's Marble Runs. Theme tune by Jack Buchanan, additional music from Audio Network. Special thanks to our crack team of voice actors Ruth, Graham, Connor, Clara, Eliza, Kirsten and Indy. Editing by Toby Longbottom, mixing by Andrew McDowell of Digicake, graphics by Phil Johnson, photography by Abigail Dougherty, Chris Skelton and David Unwin. Social media and video editing by Via Digital. Thanks especially to Marcus Logan and Jacob Vale. At Stuff, thanks to executive producer Chris Reed, content producer Dave Hull and senior legal counsel Charlotte Curry. And crucially, this podcast couldn't exist if it weren't for the dozens of people who agreed to sit down and talk really frankly about their experience during New Zealand's pandemic years. So if you'll bear with us, ngā mihi nunui kia Michael Baker, Hilary Barry, Ashley Bloomfield, Jack Buchanan, Helen Clark, Ruth Croft, Andrew Crook, Josh Freeman, Edward Gay and Gemma Geegan. Juliet Gerard, Marcus Gower, Paddy Gower, Hone Harawira, Hazel Harrison, Sean Hendy, Joanne Hewitt and Larissa Hockey. David Hood, Carl Horsley, Lauren Jelly, Nise Manuel, Jenny McGee, Lavinia McGee Rapier, Mike Minogue, Andrea Nelson and Tova O'Brien. Robert Patman, Helen Petusis Harris, Michael Plank, Kimiora Rairino, Rebecca Rowland, Anders Technell, Susie Wiles, David Winter and Katie Wright. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you all. And this podcast was made with the support of NZ On Air.
Quarantine Nation!